high performance and then decline. Yesterday I was lecturing to my economics class, and I was just giving them an indication. When did the Philippines sort of become a tail ender in the development process? I listed all the countries, Japan down to Vietnam. You know, I did not list Cambodia, but I had all the big countries and I was looking at the date 1970s to the 1980s as the point when they began to overtake us. So that's one story, and it reflects this kind of thing. I didn't have these numbers, but I could see it from the kinds of things I have studied about the way we have developed. At the end of the war, when we became independent, we had enormous amount of resources. We had, because of the trade-off on the parity amendment, we got America to give us war damage payment. That explains the very high level of growth in the 1950s, because American U.S. expenditures and so on and so forth, war damage payment, they really created a very high level of rehabilitation and reconstruction of the economy. Beyond that, all the things that were inherited from the provisions of the Constitution, they began to take an effect. Everybody was talking about the banking system it was not part of the Constitution, but the banking system must be owned by Filipinos only. So we began to have very small banks ruling even the foreign trade area. We had, of course, a few foreign banks. They could operate, but not significantly. That's one sector in which the Philippines, at the beginning of its independence, lagged behind all the other countries that allowed foreign banks to come in and help them in the financial development, okay? But beyond that, I think I could talk about changes in policies, like because of the provisions of the Constitution, because of the things that made us become more nationalistic in approach to all the legislation, including the Board of Investment legislation on incentives to industries, which were only mainly given to Filipino joint ventures and a few to potential 100% foreign-owned companies, but requiring enormous amounts of reduction in the equity share within the original investment incentives. This, incidentally, was an incentive law that was sponsored by one of the famous heroes of nationalism, you know, Jokno. He was the one who passed the Export Incentives Act, the Investment Incentives Act, even though great Filipino government leaders were trying to improve it. Cesar Virata was the principal person helping out on the implementation of these laws. But he was, all of us were tied, basically, we had to follow all these provisions, and of course we liberalized a lot of them. The liberalization of these laws took some time to undertake. There was a lot of delay. So when I summarize Philippine economic problems, I look at inefficiencies that arose out of all these policies, and I can imagine basically 4 or 5 inefficiencies that were, I think, critical in assessing why we have lagged behind, and where some of the changes have to be tackled if these countries to move forward effectively. And I have of course written recently about where I want certain changes to be. And some of you have read that I'm saying we must correct that thing on the constitutional provision. Abolish it entirely if possible, but it's impossible given the way we have rearranged the way amendments to the Constitution should be undertaken. I suspect that a person like the president we have, if he just said we want to do it, he can do it. But I don't see anything happening. I haven't heard anything. In fact, that kind of thing is something I haven't heard. But anyway, I've talked a lot, but I'm now just going to say 5 inefficiencies that I think are needed to be corrected. there is a capital resource deficiency, inefficiency. We have not been able to improve the use of capital because when we were using it, we used it on the industries that did not matter very much to make us competitive. That was in fact affected by the number 4 inefficiency that I'm talking about. Is the inefficiency that was contributed by the long period of protection that we were trying to undertake, trying to reform but could not reform because many of the industries were owned by people who were major owners of the way the country has to move politically. Okay? I think Senator Enrile said it in some ways recently. I quoted him in that little note I wrote about why we need to change the Constitution. He said this country is ruled by a lot of rich people who were I mean, the Constitution favors rich people more, he said. And we cannot, he said something more striking. I want, well, I think he said it this way. The country is ruled by rich people. We cannot control them because they control the politics of the nation. They control even they run the government and so on, and then they do this and so on. I think he was exaggerating because he's part of the he's part of the ruling class and he wants to change it. He's very rich too, you know. But he said the rich people may even control the police and the local government. So that's one thing. Anyway, the other inefficiency is related to labor inefficiency. We tolerated enormous amount of high standards in labor legislation, pricing us out of the pricing out labor, which we have enormously of at the earliest point when we could have used that labor to create the industries that would have employed them. But practically, the government did not reform the labor laws sufficiently. Even now, we're still working on that problem. One of the papers I've been working on, or one of my passions, is to write about labor market issues, and nobody listens to me. The other inefficiency is about inefficiency in land use. Why? Land reform is one factor. It overextended its coverage, when in fact all the countries that were supposed to have succeeded in land reform began and used it only on a limited objective. Like in Taiwan, they had limited areas, they reformed it. After that, they went on to the process of what do you call that? Consolidation. I mean, South Korea also, where countries cannot decide on the land reform issue, the problem becomes larger and larger, and it's very large in this country. Even forestry lands are now covered, when in fact, if you think of the hills that are bare, we can really use foreign investments to plant all those trees in those things and have paper companies just sprout and make the country a big producer of paper, the way Indonesia is a big producer of paper based in the island of Sumatra. So what else? There's the other one. We have enormous amounts of regulations, and that regulations create enormous amount of rent seeking, and it makes a lot of jobs for lawyers. Okay? That's all. So my take on the immediate future, I'm not very optimistic, but I'm praying we get a leader who would like to reform the Constitution. If they reform that, I think within a short time we will march beyond a lot of the other countries that are becoming havens of entries of foreign investments. But I'm still optimistic because in the long run, you know, people will listen to me. And like Keynes, who said, in the long run, we are all dead, I'm saying in this country, in the long run, people will listen to what I'm saying. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jerry.